Speaking of reliability, a podcast with good friends talking with you about reliability engineering topics.
Welcome to Speaking of Reliability. This is Carl Carlson.
And this is Fred Schenkler. Hey, Carl.
Hey, Fred. Yeah, I've been getting a lot of really good help from Sendo Reliability listeners and readers on the book that I'm writing. And it's just so much fun to hear different points of view, people from all over the world, some of them well experienced in FMEA, some of them virtually new, which is what I wanted.
Mm-hmm.
And a number of topics came up where they, in addition to reviewing, they said, by the way, what about this? What about this? Basically asking questions. So I have a ton of new questions, and I thought I'd share one of them with you this morning.
Okay, cool. I'm trying to think, have you been answering readers' questions since way back in your LISOF days? When
Yes.
you were doing the FMEA there in a newsletter. Have you ever kept track of how many questions you've answered?
I've not kept track of the total. I do have a database where people have generic questions where there's nothing proprietary.
Mm-hmm.
And I kept those for future use, and I check with them and stuff like that. But it's many hundreds of
Oh, yeah.
Maybe more than.
Yeah, I'm thinking that might be another topic for us at some point is why we do that.
Yeah.
But that'll take us aside real quick.
It is, but I'll just mention that I get great satisfaction out of engaging with people on this subject. And so when I can answer a question, it gives me personal joy, and it helps the person. So I think it's a win-win for people. It keeps me connected to, because application is way broader than the theory. The theory, sounds fairly simple, whatever. But then you have all these different variations of application problems come up. It's almost never ending, all the permutations of issues that come up.
Oh, yeah, definitely. Yeah, no, I agree with you. I put it on the list as a topic to come into. And it includes, the other thought I had is I'm adding a new author today to the site. And it actually is related to what we're talking about here today, is that his article was on, reliability, or FMEA is not to fill out a chart, it's to help make decisions. And he had a more elegant title than that, but it's a very well written article, and I'm looking forward to adding him as an author. So I'm
fantastic. Absolutely correct.
Yeah. And it was, the idea is that you wanted feedback for the book. And I remember a month or 6 weeks ago, we sent out a couple of notices saying, hey, can you help out Carl here? And he'll give you a couple of chapters of the book to look at. And I don't think you had planned on answering a bunch of questions for that, but in your nature, you do it anyway. And I think that's cool. So, all right. So what's the one that you mentioned something about the severity, occurrence, and detection scales? Yeah,
the severity, occurrence, detection scales. Now, some companies, particularly organizations like the military and some other companies, have historically used SO, that'd be severity, occurrence.
Mm-hmm.
And many companies and organizations use SOD, that adds in detection. And so the purpose of this question wasn't, do you do SO or SOD? The purpose of the question was, it goes something like this. My standard says you use a 1 to 10 scale. And in your examples in your book, you're using a 1 to 5 scale.
Mm-hmm.
What's up on that? That kind of question.
Oh, man. I get that in a session with people, and we have a 10-point scale. I think I'm using McDermott's book as a precursor, so we're all in the same definitions and page, and it's easy to read and stuff like that. And we start off, and it's a 1 to 10 scale, and I said, all right, here's the first one. What do you think it is? And I just used my hand. I write 1 to 10 on the chalkboard. I'm getting old. on the board. And I just kind of use my hand as a leveling device, as a pointer, and say, hey, where do you think it is? And somebody will say 4, and somebody else will say, no, it's a 6. And okay, and then which one? Any discussion? Okay, everybody agree what it is? If you don't, it's a 6. And then after about 5 or 10 of them, it's 2, 4, 6, 8, 10 is the scale they've chosen. And I don't bother to correct them that they now have a 5-point scale.
Right.
It doesn't matter.
Right. Well, and the standards often enforce these scales. So people, like in the automotive industry, they've used 1 to 10 for years. In
Well,
my
they use
book,
1 to 10, but it's like in the occurrence scale, they actually put probabilities next to it. This is 1 in 100, 1 in 1,000, 1 in a million. And I'm looking at the teams like, how do we even know?
well, you don't know. That's part of the problem. And you know that, Fred.
Yeah.
And so do most people realize that, but a lot of people are very comfortable with numbers. And so it can be a guidance, like, okay, if you think it's 1 in 1,000, that'd be very subjective, which the scale is
Mm-hmm.
supposed to be subjective.
Yeah. Is that the way the standards are written, though, Carl? Are they saying you have to say this is between 1 in 100, 1 in 1,000 goes as a 6, or is it as an example that this is because I haven't read the standards as closely as you have, but are they suggesting scales or are they requiring scales?
Very good. They technically they're example scales or they have a word for it. I'm forgetting the word, but but most people interpret it as that is the scale. And
Right.
most of the contracts to the suppliers, that is the scale. We've
Mm.
always had a clause going back to the 1990s when I worked on FMEA Standards, Automotive Industry Action Group. We've always said the scales can be tailored, and the mill standards for FMEA likewise. So it's published, but it can be tailored.
Yeah,
Yeah,
that's what I thought, and that's why I learned it. And then I found it in practice that you just have to be flexible. You have to,
you have to.
because a 2 in one group is not a 2 in another group. Doesn't matter what
Well,
the guidance is.
there's so many stories here, Fred. I had I won't mention names here, very high up on the organization chart and a company I worked for some time. He said that he wanted to use the RPN across all different parts. So he wanted that to be valid outside the boundaries of the individual FMEA. So
I
this
remember
part,
this.
yeah,
This was an automotive thing, and I was working with some company that was making, I think, rearview mirrors, and they were forced into a fixed scale, and they were like, "All of our stuffs are 2s." And I said,
yeah.
"Well, is there any limit for your own internal purpose?" And they got FMEA, and they were struggling with how do I implement it. I says, "Well, how about you use 2.1 and 2.2 and 2.3?" Oh, I hadn't thought of that. And so
Huh.
they had a 10-point scale again.
Well, it comes back to what the purpose is. The purpose is to prioritize risk. The purpose is not to have an objective number.
Yeah.
And so you're looking to prioritize risk so that you can address the highest priority, highest risk. That's the purpose. And so that you don't need an objective number to do that. You just need to know, is it more or less than other
Mm-hmm.
ones? And in my book, Fred, I have said very clearly, and when preparing for FMEAs, um, use the number of gradations. I'll use that word, like 1 to 5, 1 to 7. I've worked with some companies I won't mention that use 1 to 7
Mm-hmm.
or 1 to 10, or as you point out, tailored. Use the least number of gradations that you need to differentiate risk.
Right.
And so if you don't need 1 to 10, and in my experience, you usually don't, you can differentiate the risk very well on a 1 to 5 or something like that. Then don't use it. Now, the problem is, and this is where the question came in, we're told to use it. What do we do? Well,
Yeah, and that's it's if it was like somebody says we're told to use MTBF, I say, well,
yeah,
because you're asking on the no MTBF site, you shouldn't. Yet it's a requirement for the condition of sale. They want an MTBF number. Well, do the Weibull analysis, do all the good engineering. At the end of the day, after you've made all your design decisions and everything else, then make a, calculate the MTBF and send it off. But there's nothing wrong with using a 10-point scale, but only using 4 numbers in it.
Yeah.
We are thinking of the 10-point scale, but we're only using 2, 4, 6, 8.
Which accomplishes the same thing
Right.
that we're talking about.
And one other thing about it is, I had run into teams that they agonize over the difference between a 2 and a 4, and they already have 5 or 6 things that are 8s on a scale. And I'm like, does this happen all the time? If the occurrence is kind of in the middle range, or it's the occurrence scale that we're actually on, and it's not a high severity thing, it's going to wash out that we're never going to get to this. We have 18 more higher priority things already on the board. Let's move on and just pick a number. At some point, the lower numbers really don't matter.
Yeah, I never want the team to get stuck on something that isn't adding value.
Right.
That's where if you're enforced to use a 10-point scale that you don't need, are going to spend time debating, is it a 2 or a 3 or whatever, and you're wasting time.
Yeah, exactly. Now it's a 2-month program or process.
And this is very important because FMEA will fall into disuse, or it'll become a numbers game or a fill out the form if it's not done based on principles, and if it's not kept lean and focused on priorities and risk. It'll become cumbersome, burdensome, and a waste of time. And so it's a really important subject.
Oh, it is. And it is a barrier for so many teams to recognize that it is just a relative ranking, and it's allowing us as a team to come up with what are the top issues that we need to dive into. What are the top risks? And it's successful when we're not really too terribly worried about the actual. It's a 3.3.8, or 3.314 or 3.14. I'm thinking of that number 16, and and it's like
1596 or something.
Yeah, like that. There's people who are better at remembering it than I am. But the idea is that if you already have a 10 or something that is going to be an engineering challenge, and it's going to consume a whole chunk of your engineering staff, you're never going to get to anything that's going to run out as a 3 or like a 20 counts down on the priority list. And it's about the priority. It's not about the actual number. It never is. And if you're suggested or asked to do a particular scale, well, use that scale. And if you don't happen to have a 3 or an 8 in there, it doesn't mean you have to. You were on a 10-point scale. It could be chunked in 3s. It could be chunked in 2s. It could be all 10. It could be fractions of, a 100-point scale, actually, using decimals like 3.14. I actually had one team that liked doing that. This is a little more than this one, so we'll give it a 10th. And I'm like, okay, whatever.
Yeah, I'll make a couple of comments too to the subject for our listeners. The most companies, organizations want to have a consistent scale. So very often a company will publish their own internal FMEA procedures and that type of thing.
Scales, yep.
And they can tailor it to their application. In other words, if a company wants to have a 1 to 7 scale, and they're not mandated by contract or customer, that's perfectly fine. They would have the criteria for that and things like that. So typically, when I consult with companies, I don't necessarily want each FMEA team to just sort of invent their own scale if the company wants to have a standardized process. So there's that subject of a company has the right to issue procedures and things like that. The other thing I'll mention is that
I was going to say on that, it has the advantages that it standardizes the procedure. Here's what to expect when you're invited to an FMEA. So it reduces the amount
Mhm.
of debate of over, oh, I always use a 5 point
Yeah,
scale
you don't
or
want
I
to waste
always
that
use a
time.
7. Yeah. We know what we're getting into. It's the same training for everybody. It's the same book for everybody, same policy, and you go on. But within that individual session, yeah, you have a 7 point scale, but you might only use three of the numbers.
Right. So you use what you need to use. The and the other comment I'll make is severity is different than occurrence and detection
Hmm.
in that there are criteria that relate to safety and performance that are very important. Like if you have a safety issue, you have probably internal company policy
Yeah.
of what you need to do. And so your severity scale can, if you're doing a 1 to 5 scale, 5 could be, for instance, in the bill standards, that's a failure which could result in catastrophic human loss.
Right.
Um, and whereas a pinched finger might be a lesser safety type problem, so it wouldn't be a 5. Or you
Hmm.
could have complete loss of a system like a space shuttle, um, even though the humans are safe if they have some way of escaping. But that equipment is very expensive, and so that could be a very high severity.
Hmm.
Um, so you can have criteria, and the point I'm getting to is that makes it really easy for the team. If you can say, okay, is there going to be loss of life?
Yeah.
Potential, not
Yeah.
not
Or,
certain.
whatever asset losses are. If we
Yeah,
lose the
loss,
building,
whatever the
for
loss
example.
is, that then moves you towards a certain level on the severity scale. You don't have to debate it other than what the effect statement is. What's the consequence? You can debate
Hmm.
that.
Right. Right.
But then the assignment of a numerical rating is very simple.
One of the examples I had on that severity ranking was when it was a safety issue, it got a star. And almost always they were using a 10 point scale. And it was always either an 8, 9, or 10, but they would put
Mhm.
a star on it saying, independent of all the other scores, we have to address this one. And in most cases, they already were.
Yeah, yeah. And then one of the problems I have with the automotive scale of 1 to 10
Hmm.
is it basically lumps all levels of safety together. So if you have a pinched finger, that is the same severity as loss of human life. And
Yeah.
not and that is not the case in a lot of other industries. It's certainly not the case in the military standard.
Hmm.
So I really want to make people aware of the fact that the standard use matters, and you can tailor it if with approval of your company and your customer to make sense for your business. And gradation of risk is really important. So I really don't want people to automatically use some published scale as if it's the gospel. It
Right.
has to be done.
Yeah. I wholly second that. And um, I'm hesitating here to sign off and ask for more questions. Would you like some more questions, Carl?
Well, I have I have a ton of questions from the editors of my book and things. We can
Yeah.
do that at a different podcast. On this subject, I think I've covered the question the person asked, do they have to use the 1 to 10? I think the answer is that's going to be up to your company. In other words, you need to talk with your company, but I would say, no, you don't. If you get your company to support you and your
Yeah.
customer, you should use the least number of gradations that make sense for the
Yeah.
risk that you're identifying. That would be my answer to that question.
Yeah. I totally agree with you. And what I'm asking though is if, in our normal sign off for the podcast, we usually ask for your questions. So are you up for the
Oh yeah,
potential
yeah.
for some
Let's
more?
open that up. I would love to hear people. Thank you for that prompt. I would, we've only done this 200 times.
Yeah.
Uh, I would really love to hear from people on this subject. This is a very hot topic. In other words, do you have to follow word for word a standard? And embedded from the beginning on this subject of FMEA standards, we've allowed tailoring. And so I would love to hear from people if you feel like you have to use it, or can you tailor, or what questions you have about that subject.
Yeah. Exactly. And you can do that over at accendoreliability.com/go/SOR. There's a couple of ways to get in touch with us. And Carl and I and the other hosts are available through LinkedIn and our About pages. And despite Carl mentioning that he has dozens of questions to respond to from his reviewers, I'm quite sure Carl, you would not be terribly upset if you got another dozen questions for us to talk about on future podcasts.
Not at all. I look forward to it.
Okay, there we go. I thought so. And same with us. And both Carl and I and the other hosts really do try to respond to any question we get. It's just kind of in the nature of what we do. And we really do enjoy hearing from you. And whether it's you enjoy the show or you learn something or you save your company $1 million. And, we're not going to ask you for a tenth of it. It'd be nice, but that's not required. But we'd love to hear your success stories too. So please do get in touch. We'd really like to hear from you. All right. Thanks, Carl. We'll talk to you again soon.
Talk to you soon, Fred.
Thanks for listening to Speaking of Reliability. We invite you to join the conversation. If you have a question or a topic that you think we should discuss in a future show, please let us know. You can find a comment box below the episode show notes, or just leave a note as part of a review on iTunes.